So I recently did some videos where I provided you guys with an update on my comic book room and all the improvements and enhancements that I've been making to build this room out. In one of those videos, I showed you this wall behind me and kind of talked about the process that I went through to build this wall out. I received, following that video going live, about a dozen messages from people out there expressing concern about the sunlight hitting my books. It took me just a little while to realize that what people were reacting to was the light bouncing off the slabs. And I realized that I forgot to mention the fact that I use a light to film my videos to make sure that you can actually see me and see the books that I'm showing. It wasn't sunlight on the books. But in that moment, I realized that I needed to do another video, a video to show you guys how I was protecting those slabs and the books that are in this room from what comes through that window right there. I thought my way through it. I made some improvements that I'm going to show you. But then I realized that there was one factor that I did not account for. If you want to know what I'm talking about, stay tuned to this video. Reggie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. In this video, I am going to give you guys an update on how I am protecting my slabs from the dangers of sunlight. Thankfully, I've received a lot of feedback from you guys out there about ways to enhance my comic book room. I cannot thank you guys enough for the messages that you post here, the messages that you send me to Instagram, and the emails that I've received with all kinds of advice on desks, on storage, on slabs, on designs, on ventilation, you name it. You guys have been amazing in reaching out to me to give me a couple of things to think about, and I am very thankful for that. One of the things that I've also engaged many of you in is a discussion around sunlight and UV protection. I've done my research, I've gotten online, and I've realized that there were some things that I wanted to do for this room. I went ahead and did them, and then I realized that I forgot to ask permission from my wife. This is my comic book room, yes, but it is the house that she runs. And so I made some improvements to the window to my right here that may or may not pass muster. We'll see what she thinks about it in the next couple of days. But I wanted to, while I have it, spend a couple of minutes to show you guys what kind of changes and modifications that I've made to this window. So when I first started working on the room, one of the things that I did is I wanted to make sure that the books were protected from sunlight. So I put up some blackout curtains to make sure that sunlight could not get into the room. I would take them down when I would film, but by and large, the blackout curtains were always up there to provide UV protection to the books in the room and also to keep it a little bit cool in here. And so the blackout curtains were really just temporary. I knew that I wanted to apply a film to the windows to prevent the UV from penetrating the room and damaging the books. I got on Amazon, I did a little bit of research, and I went and looked at various solutions of film that you could apply to the window here, and I landed on one that was essentially a blackout film that would not leave any kind of sticky residue on the window, certainly wouldn't damage the window, and seemed relatively straightforward to apply. So the first tip that I want to provide you guys is around making sure that you're taking some accurate measurements of your windows, specifically the glass area of the window. And once you do your measurements, you want to add 10 to 15% to that overall number. That 10 to 15% is going to account for any kind of wastage, maybe some mistakes that you made, but it's also going to account for the directions saying to gross up the overall area by 1 inch to 1/2 inch on either side, and then trim back the excess and dispose of it. You want to make sure that you account for this wastage in the calculations that you run versus having just enough or not enough material when you start working on your windows. That brings me to the second tip. Make sure you have enough material to cover your windows. So when you do your measurements, take the measurements twice, make sure that you read all the directions around the material that you're choosing to purchase. The materials come in different configurations, different lengths, different widths, different thicknesses, different quantities. And you want to make sure that when you place your order, that you order enough for the job that you have on hand. So the next tip that I want to offer you is to make sure you know what you're buying. When I jumped on Amazon to place my order, I was bombarded with a ton of different sizes, different widths, different dimensions. But I also noticed that these materials came with designs, with shapes, with patterns. They ranged from relatively clear all the way up to what I ended up purchasing, which is essentially a blackout UV film that allows no sunlight in at all. So there is a range in how dark these UV protections are. So you want to make sure that you're understanding what you're buying and that, again, you buy enough of the materials. So that brings me to my next tip, and it's around making sure that you have all the materials that you need to be able to execute the project properly. When I was reading about my project and also planning it, the directions said that you could use a plastic card to essentially serve as a squeegee to remove some of the excess water that was applied to the window and also to the back of the UV film. What I found is that the card was not adequate to actually do that. I had some relatively large air bubbles that were trapped beneath the film that could only be removed by a squeegee. Thankfully, I had a squeegee on hand, and so I ran to get that, and that was what allowed me to ensure that the UV film was applied correctly and that there were no air bubbles that were actually trapped behind the film. Because my film is relatively thick and it also has a little bit of a shimmer to it, I actually couldn't even see the air bubbles from the inside. It wasn't until I went outside to actually check how it looked from the outside that I saw this massive air pocket right in the middle of the window. So again, that's when I went and grabbed the squeegee and used it to actually remove that air bubble, and it was relatively straightforward. But if I had just read the directions and just followed that, then this would have not been sufficient to properly apply the film to the window. The last tip that I have is to take your time. The good thing is that the one that I purchased, for example, has no adhesive to it, right? So it is soapy water that is applied to the window, applied to the film, that allows the film to properly adhere to the window. But there was no rush, like there was no kind of time element in this thing where if I didn't get it set or laid down in a proper time that the project would fall apart. That wasn't the case. And I have a feeling that that's the case with a lot of these films that you apply to the window. So my point is to take your time. Make sure you understand the materials, the directions, the steps that you have to follow. And if you take your time, if you do it right, I'm confident that your UV protection will turn out incredibly well. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I hope that you found it helpful. Take care